with you tonight. What a treat to be with David Rovics, a wordsmith, a singer, and now you're going to have a book out. I want to know about your book. Congratulations, David. I call him the troubadour of the movement. And, I think it was 1996 or something when David came and joined a small motley crew of us outside of a sound building where we were protesting, and we were very excited to realize that his art and humor could be at the disposal of the movement if he would come and be with people such as us. And so thank you for going all around the world, really. And to Steve and the Pikes Peak Peace and Justice Group, thank you for this invitation, and also Steve and Mary Lynn. I literally arrived in Colorado Springs about a week ago, like walking germ warfare. I was getting over pneumonia, and I had thrown my back out. I was about 85 pounds, and so they've just been like all heels setting me up to buck with the Colorado College Group. I also want to just say hello to people I just met, Kim and Mario. Thank you.
Yay.
Talk to these two before you leave if you don't know them yet. I have a friend in England. His name is Mill Rye. He's one of my favorite people in the world. And he came up with just a very short line. He said, one of the ways to stop a next war is to continue to tell the truth about this war. Now, the problem is which war? We're involved in perpetual warfare, it seems. And war after war after war. And so I would like to kind of dig back into vintage past and hope that some of you who've heard some of these tales before won't feel like, oh my God, it's reruns. Steve always encourages me to tell this particular story. It is one that I like to tell. And it goes back to the war in Iraq. So many people had the idea that only one person lived in all of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, and of course it was a nation of people who had been abused and downtrodden not only by Saddam but by so much that had been happening because of the United States economic sanctions. And so, as it happens, I was in Baghdad in Iraq with a group called the Iraq Peace Team, and we had no intention of leaving. We were going to stay. We knew the war was going to break out at some point in 2002, and then 2002 became 2003, and we thought, well, it's likely going to happen pretty soon, but we were going to hold our ground. And all of a sudden, I, who have never been to Ireland, although I'm the daughter of a mother who grew up in Ireland, got a call from the Sisters of St. Bridget in Kildare, Ireland. Kathy, you'll be coming over to talk with us now, won't you? Because Shannon Airport's being used as a pit stop for the military warplanes, and we've got to have a retreat to see what we can do about it. Could you not come soon? And so I said, well, sister, no, I couldn't, because we're the Iraq Peace Team and we're staying in Baghdad. Well, she melted me after a while, and I said, sister, I'll try to get a ticket. So I went to Iraq for the first time. Ireland, from Iraq for the first time. And I gave the best talk I could to the retreat that the sisters had organized, and told about many, many experiences breaking the U.S. law, bringing medicines and antibiotics and children's vitamins. And Susan came from Colorado along with other fine representatives. And we wanted to challenge the economic sanctions, but now it seemed as though this huge invasion and airborne disaster was going to befall people in Iraq. So I had come with laminated photos of children from hospitals that we visited, photos of Basra with its streets full of garbage, and I left the photos with my friends and went back to Baghdad. And I think maybe I was there 4 or 5 days when word came that 5 of the people who had been at that talk decided that the best next step for them to take to try to prevent the war was to do $2.5 million worth of damage to a U.S. Navy warplane parked on the tarmac. I didn't tell them. But they called themselves the Pit Stop Plowshares. I think some of you would know the Plowshares theme, when shall come the day when they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift a sword against nation, neither shall they continue to learn the ways of war any longer. So these 5 were very faith-based in what they did. And off they went to trial, and the trial lawyers thought it would be a good idea to bring that Kathy Kelly person over for the trial because of this talk that I'd given that had something to do with their, and then they could use the laminated photos that I'd left, and they had bought those with them when they did damage to the plant. So the trial lasted 3 years.
Oh my God.
The first gathering for this trial occurred. Of course, the shock and awe invasion had happened, and it was shocking, and it was awful. And when the trial was kind of put together, the first judge, he had the proverbial Irish temper. You know, they wear the sheepskin wig, in those days they did, and I thought his wig was going to go right through the ceiling. He was so angry at the prosecutors because he said, no, charge them with this. And so he had to be recused from the case. So it's another year before they can get everybody's schedules together, and I'm brought back over again for the second trial. And this time, the judge had had dinner with George and Laura Bush about 3 times. So trial falls apart. He's off the case. Third time, this time the judge is a woman, and she seems very fair-minded to me until she said, there will be no faith-based testimony in my courtroom. I'll not allow you to speak a word about your faith in front of the jury. There went their defense, pretty much, because they believed that they were charged by their faith to do what they did. And then, even though they had assembled a really interesting set of witnesses, somebody from Iraq Veterans Against War, a ballistic missiles expert, Dennis Holliday from the United Nations, had resigned his post as an act of conscience, she said, the only witness will be Miss Kelly. Miss Kelly can speak to each of these men. So then they got the albatross. I mean, I can so easily look like crazy lady in front of a jury, right? And I thought, this is going south very, very fast. But the defendants, the Fifth Stop Plowshares, were very fortunate because they had 3 of the best, they call them barristers, in all of Ireland. And so the trial was fascinating. It's been, you can read the transcripts if you go online. But at the end, according to Irish law, even though they couldn't say a word about their faith, at the end of an Irish trial, the barristers can say anything they want with the jury present, and the judge has to put up with it. And so Mr. Nix, who was one of the barristers, looked like he was right out of Central Casting. He had a grizzly gray ponytail and was balding and a big pot belly under his long black gown and a sheepskin wig and beady eyes and a kind of a walrus mustache beard and just a character. And so when it was his turn to make his final statement, he faced off with the judge. And he said, the greatest pacifist of all time was Jesus of Nazareth. And the greatest pacifist document ever written was the Sermon on the Mount, and I'm about to read it to you right now, Irish Catholic jury. And so he starts to read the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. And as he went on, you could see the jury was starting to nod a little bit, and he said, the problem with these 5, the defendants, is that they don't practice their religion. I'll take a bit of this, but put a hold on that. They believe what their faith tells them, and they act on what their faith says. And then he changed his tone, and he began to describe a beautiful day in the Dublin Park. He'd been sitting on a park bench, and he was watching children chase ducks up the hill, and the ducks were chasing the children down the hill, and the children were squealing with joy, and suddenly he told us that the most beautiful, universal sound of beauty in any language must be the sound of children at play. He's got us all in his hand, right? And then he's booming at us. They're bombing children in a swimming hole in Lebanon. Children are dying in a pool of their own blood. Well, I've been so keyed into the court trial. I hadn't read a newspaper for about 4 days, and I pulled the Irish Times over and quick started scanning it. And I'm sure I was reading the same article he'd read coming into the courtroom, that in the Israeli-Hezbollah war of the summer of 2006, an Israeli missile had been fired right into a children's swimming hole. And the article talked about Abu Ishmael, who sat on the rim of the crater and held his head in his hands. And he screamed out, Hezbollah here? only children here. Ibni home, my son here. But his son wasn't there. His son was one of 3 who'd been killed. And there were at least 11 others seriously injured. And the article said that there were little tiny plastic slippers caked with blood and mud scattered around the area. And so Mr. Nix, in a sense, put all of us on trial. He asked, would you not try, if you could, to stop a Hezbollah missile from slamming into southern Israel? Sorry, northern Israel. Would you not try, if you could, to stop an Israeli missile from slamming into southern Lebanon? The question isn't, do these 5 have a lawful excuse to do what they did? The question is, what's your excuse? What's our excuse not to do more? What will rise you? And the 5 were acquitted. I'm all 5. But I obviously can still hear Mr. Nix's question, what will rise you? And I feel I'll never, 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 never be acquitted. May I tell you that after the United States Marines arrived in Baghdad, we went out with water for them. How could you not? We had a lot of water. They were thirsty. But my friend Neville stood, and he was, must have been 75, 76 years old, an Australian barrister, and also a minister. And he had made a big sign, war equals terror, period. And while some of us went out and started to chat up the Marines, Neville stood with his sign. His arms were shaking, his legs were shaking. We begged him, Neville, it's been 6 hours, Neville, 7 hours, Neville, sit down. But he had to hold that sign up. And I guess maybe 2 days later, in the lobby of the Alfanar Hotel, one of the women I'd grown so close to during the bombing, her name was Lada, and I had tried to kind of entertain the little girls, Zainab and Mabada, during the bombing, and they were both grinding their teeth morning, noon, and night. And she was just desperate, not knowing what was going to happen to her family. So now the bombing has stopped, right? And the Marines had set up a checkpoint right outside our hotel, and there's barbed wire everywhere, but it looks like, it's, as things go, safer than it was. And I walked over to where she was sitting in a big overstuffed chair in that lobby. Susan would remember it, big, huge plate glass windows you can see in every direction. And I just wanted to take her kids outside because they'd been cooped up for so long. And then I remembered, maybe they'll run into the barbed wire. And I was assuring her I'd hold on to them each. And then I realized tears were coursing down her cheek, and she'd sat over there to have a good cry. I said, Milada, Shinovich, what's the matter? And she said to me, Kathy, never before did I think that this would happen to my country. And she's looking out at the Marines and the barbed wire and the Humvees and the tanks and the Jeeps and the armored personnel carriers and all signs of occupation. And she said, I feel very sad. And I think that this sadness, it will never go away. Sometimes you don't know that you're hearing from a prophet. I think that this sadness, it will never go away. And there I was with my blue passport, and I would hug her daughters goodbye, go back to the safety, go back to the security. I always come back. But the war hasn't ended. The longest war in U.S. history has been the war in Iraq. The 80s, when the United States armed both sides, and Henry Kissinger said things couldn't be better. Both sides are using our weapons. And the Desert Fox invasion and bombing, and the economic sanctions that started in August of 1990 and didn't end until well after the 2003 war. And then the shock and awe bombing. And now the war goes on. And if they could, the elites that prosecuted that war and perpetrate so many wars, if they could, they'd have us believe it was a humanitarian war. But I think most people don't buy it, a humanitarian war. Such an oxymoron. And I just came back from Afghanistan. And teenagers, Banin and Zainab, two beautiful young girls, and Abdullah and Ali, two of my favorite people in the world, these two young Afghan peace volunteers now, welcoming girls into their midst. They literally took my hand and helped me go up the mountainside. And after about 20 minutes or 25 minutes, I said, no, I can't go anymore. My heart is out. I think I'm going to faint. And so we stopped and we rested. And I looked down, and there's this amazing cityscape of Kabul. We'd gone up fairly high. But above, it's a very, very cold day. There were women in the flimsiest of bright-colored garments. And on their heads or on their shoulders, heavy containers of water. And I thought, oh my word, how do they do it? The road, first you have stairs, and then you have this no more stairs and a rutted, icy, tiny, narrow, curving so-called road, and these women navigate their way up that road carrying the heavy containers of water, and they do it every day. And why? Because, you see, they've been pushed, widows and orphans, pushed up the mountainside, because the higher you go, the less possibility of any kind of piped water. And these are the women who, when piped water finally did come in, couldn't afford it, so they had to move higher. And of course there aren't any sewage or sanitation or septic systems, and so they live in one-room hovels. And it's so cold. And what they use for fuel, they have these little stoves called bukharis, and they open the door and they crack almonds all day, and with small scoops shove the almond shells into the bukhari, the heater, and that's their fuel. They can't afford wood. They can't afford coal. They can't even manage to get scraps of paper and plastic living up on the mountainside. And then the almonds are separated. They never snack on them, though those are sold, and that's their income. 1 out of every 11 Afghan women dies in childbirth. In the rural areas, they can't afford midwives. A tortuous death, no prenatal care. 1 out of every 5 Afghan children doesn't make it beyond the age of 5. Imagine the women carrying the bundles of their children whom they love so much to the cemeteries. And yet, I'm the house guest from hell across this country, I have to confess. Because I'll be invited to stay at a home, and I'll get into a conversation with a woman who cares so deeply about Afghanistan, and she's read all of Greg Mortenson's books, and well, then that became kind of a disappointment. But now she'll say to me, you know, I'm not a militarist, but I can't bear the thought of the Afghan troops leaving and the women and children in Afghanistan being left behind. And it's all I can do to keep the Irish temper. I have no business talking about that judge. I'm like, whoa! And so, sometimes with an edge to my voice, I'll start to explain why I don't believe that the United States has waged a humanitarian war in Afghanistan, why I don't believe that the United States has been there because of its care and its concern for the Afghan women and children, why I don't believe that the United States is wanting to preserve people from the Taliban. And I'm pretty sure that most of you have already come a long way in this past 11 years along the way toward recognizing that the United States would like us to believe it's a humanitarian war, because if they can get the indifference, just the indifference of the U.S. public, then we won't respond to Mr. Nix's question, what will rise now? Because we'll be uncertain. We're just not sure, and that's kind of what it takes. And so what I wish for all of us is the certitude, the surety that our wars have caused destruction, bereavement, loss, poisoning of land, poisoning of air, poisoning of water, suicides on the part of people who return. That our wars have been so profitable for the people who sell the weapons, for the people who design the weapons, for the people who market the weapons, and all of the jobs that are tied up, but that these wars do not create jobs in a way that would be greater than if our captains of industry made something that was good for people. Retrofit the housing stock all across this country. so that it will be environmentally sound. Make high-speed transportation so that we won't be filling our roads with cars all the time and using up so much fuel. Find ways to care for our elderly people creatively. Find ways to make sure our young children get care, the care they need and deserve. All of these things could be funded. We could eradicate poverty. We could solve problems with disease. $2 billion every single week. $2 billion every week was spent on the military. Convoys filled with food and with water and with fuel never stopped going into the United States bases, and sometimes it would cost $800 for 1 gallon of fuel to go into any airborne or landborne vehicle. $800 because that's how much it would cost to pay off the drug lords and the warlords that charged bribes for every single truck to go along their roads, and the U.S. paid it, and the corruption has brought Afghanistan's cities to their knees, buried underneath the corruption. And General John Allen today said that what grieves him about leaving Afghanistan is that the Afghans aren't certain about their future, and he's so sorry to leave them with that uncertainty. But he himself, you could tell there was uncertainty even in his own words. And he tried to say, well, you know, we did apologize to every family when we killed innocent civilians, and we tried to give them money. We tried to give them compensation. But there's no compensation when a child is killed collecting fuel on a mountainside, and a combat brigade unit helicopter, probably made right here in Colorado Springs, lifts up over the mountain. And then the gun protrudes, and 9 children are gunned down in cold blood. This happened under Petraeus. He said, this bloody tragedy should never have happened. But General Allen has had to apologize again and again and again. And so we come back to the question, one of the ways to stop a next war is to continue to tell the truth about this war, the wars that plague our society today, including the war against the poor. And in my city and in your city, on these cold nights, people are sleeping rough under the bridges, out in the woods. And they have their counterparts in Afghanistan. 400 people are driven by the war into Afghan cities every single day, displaced and desperate. Women came to me in Afghanistan, in the neighborhood, the working class neighborhood where I live, repeatedly saying, I think I'm losing my mind. I think I am going mad. I think I'm becoming emotionally unstable. What's wrong, Nikbat? What do you mean, Shakira? Tell me a little more, Sakina. What's the main problem? And the main problem was always the same. I can't feed my children. Well, what are you eating? Stale bread and tea without sugar. And so the Afghan peace volunteers, hearing this, these young teenagers, very young girls and young boys, thought hard what could be done. And they knew that there was a very generous woman, Fatima Borges, here in the United States, who wanted to give sewing machines to help start a cooperative. And so they asked the women, will you take these sewing machines? The boys said, you can take our sleeping room. We'll roll up our sleeping bags. We'll put up curtains. We won't be able to see you. You'll have privacy. Ask your husbands to let you come, and you can start to form a sewing class. It's something. And so that's what happened. And it was really quite remarkable because we started to realize that what they were sewing was really pretty unsaleable. The Chinese and the Pakistani factories could make prettier and cheaper garments, quite honestly. So then we asked them, well, what do you need? And it was almost like the dumbest question in the world. They said, well, winter's coming. We need warm clothing. We need warm blankets. And all of a sudden we thought, that's it. Do you know how to make those big warm blankets? They call them duvets in Europe, and I say heavy quilts. They're called rafi in Afghanistan. And they said, yes, every woman across the country, of course, knows how to make these. And so we asked them, could you make those, and we'll raise money to pay for them, but will give them away for free. And Bhuvi Har said, believe me, if you do this, we will work for less than we normally would, charge less than we normally would. We like this project so much. And so the Duvet Project was launched. They made 2,000 of these heavy quilts. And the kids would do a lot of hauling and putting together materials, and then get a small truck and go driving off for delivery. And the reason I met the women up on the mountainside was because they went every day up the mountain to identify the families and let them know, come to this yard and you can pick up 2 of these warm blankets. And I think lives were saved. And those very women also sent me home with 100 scarves that they had embroidered the APV logo onto. I have them outside, so if you'd like to help them with a leg up for next year with the Duvet Project and with their other efforts, I'm selling them for $20 a piece. I come home with great hope. Great, great hope from the people that I've been with in Afghanistan. They've asked me to tell them what they can do so that U.S. people won't hate them so much. And I tell them, that's a crazy question, that the U.S. people don't hate you. I believe the hand of friendship can be extended. We're 6% of the world's population. When we feel a bit lonely in our efforts, I think amongst the 94% of the world's population outside our borders, and of course many, many, many groups that mirror your group inside the United States, there are people all over the world longing to live without wars. And I guess my recommendation is to do what so many of you have been doing, make it your #1 priority. Believe that nonviolence can change the world. Always ask of our actions, how does it affect the poorest person in the world? Gandhi gave us that one. And never let inconvenience get in the way of acting in accord with our deepest beliefs. We've had the Occupy movement. We're surrounded by a cloud of witnesses. I think the pendulum itself is aching to swing. And so let us catch courage from one another, continue to form our communities, and believe that as we are told by my friend Milrod, one of the ways to stop a next war is to continue to tell the truth about our wars. David, thank you for all of your truth-telling. It goes down easy because of your humor, but also that lifelong commitment. And shoulder to shoulder, hand in hand, we shall overcome.
Yeah.